Lena Moore sat on a frozen park bench at midnight, gripping a positive pregnancy test while snowflakes landed on her trembling hands. 3 weeks ago, her husband had walked out without explanation. 2 weeks ago, she'd been evicted. 1 week ago, she'd realized she was pregnant with the child of a man who'd already chosen someone else. Tonight, she had $17, no home, and a future that felt like falling through ice. What Lena didn't know was that someone had been watching her unravel from the shadows, and he had no intention of looking away. Before we begin this story of betrayal, survival, and unexpected protection, please hit that like button and comment below with your city so I can see how far Lena's journey reaches across the world. The pregnancy test clattered onto the bench beside Lena Moore, its two pink lines glowing under the harsh streetlight like an accusation she couldn't defend herself against. She stared at it, her breath forming white clouds in the December air, her fingers already numb despite being shoved deep into the pockets of a coat that had seen better winters. Around her, Central Park stretched dark and mostly empty, the kind of empty that made every sound, every distant siren, every rustle of newspaper tumbling past feel magnified and threatening. Lena had come here because she had nowhere else to go. The thought settled over her like the snow beginning to fall, fine, persistent, inescapable. She watched the flakes drift down through the cone of lamplight, landing on her jeans, on the test, on the paper bag from the bodega that had cost her the last of her cash. Inside that bag sat a bottle of water she'd needed to take the test and a granola bar she'd been too nauseous to eat. $17.63 remained in her wallet. That was everything. That was her entire net worth after 26 years of life, 3 years of marriage, and 3 weeks of spectacular implosion. "Congratulations," Lena whispered to herself, the word tasting bitter. "You're going to be a mother." The irony wasn't lost on her. A mother. Her who currently qualified as homeless. Her whose husband had walked out of their apartment 23 days ago. She'd counted every single one, with nothing but a duffel bag, and the truth she'd been too stupid to see coming. "I never stopped loving her, Lena. I thought I could. I thought 3 years would be enough to forget. But it's not. I'm sorry." Sorry. Ethan Moore had looked her in the eye and said he was sorry, as if that word could somehow cushion the blow of abandonment, as if sorry could pay rent, or explain why he'd married her in the first place, when his heart had apparently still belonged to someone named Claire, a woman Lena hadn't even known existed until the moment her marriage ended. The worst part? Lena had believed him when he said he loved her. She'd believed every word, every promise, every plan they'd made together. She'd believed in their future right up until the moment he'd erased it. 2 weeks after Ethan left, their landlord had shown up with an eviction notice. Turned out Ethan hadn't paid rent in 3 months, had been draining their joint account to finance whatever reconciliation he'd been planning with his precious Claire. Lena had frantically tried to negotiate, to explain, to beg for more time, but the law didn't care about her situation. Neither did the landlord. She'd spent the last week couch surfing with the only friend who'd answered her calls, but that had ended tonight when the friend's boyfriend made it clear Lena's presence was no longer welcome. The subtext had been obvious. Grief was exhausting to be around, and Lena's particular brand of devastation was bringing down the mood. So here she sat, on a bench in Central Park, at nearly midnight on a Tuesday, holding confirmation that her situation had just graduated from disaster to catastrophe. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Ethan Moore's child, and he didn't even know. Wouldn't care if he did, probably. He'd made his choice clear when he'd walked out. Lena and whatever life they'd built together simply didn't matter enough to stay for. The nausea that had been her constant companion for the last 2 weeks intensified, though whether from morning sickness or sheer panic, Lena couldn't tell. She pressed one hand against her stomach, still flat, still showing no evidence of the truth growing inside her, and felt tears burn hot tracks down her frozen cheeks. What am I going to do? The question fell into the winter air and disappeared without answer. She couldn't afford prenatal care, couldn't afford food, couldn't afford shelter, couldn't afford anything a baby would need. The practical impossibilities stacked up in her mind like blocks, building a tower that would inevitably collapse and crush her beneath it. Maybe she should call Ethan. The thought arrived unwelcome but persistent. Maybe he deserved to know. Maybe he'd step up, do the right thing, help her figure this out. Even as she considered it, Lena knew the truth. Ethan wouldn't care. He'd made his priorities abundantly clear. Claire came first. Claire had always come first. Lena had just been too blind to see it, too caught up in the fairy tale of being loved to notice she was just a placeholder until the real princess came back. "Stupid," Lena muttered, wiping at her face with numb fingers. "You're so stupid." She'd given Ethan everything. She'd worked 2 jobs to put him through business school, had believed in his dreams, had built her entire life around their partnership. And for what? To be discarded the moment something better came along? The anger felt good, felt cleaner than the grief. Lena held on to it, let it warm her from the inside even as the temperature continued to drop. She was angry at Ethan for leaving, angry at herself for not seeing it coming, angry at the universe for adding pregnancy to an already unbearable situation. Most of all, she was angry at how small she felt, how powerless, how completely and utterly alone. A sound made her look up. Footsteps approaching from the direction of Fifth Avenue. Her body tensed instinctively. Central Park at midnight wasn't exactly safe, and she was a woman alone on a bench with nowhere to run to even if danger presented itself. But the figure that emerged from the darkness didn't feel threatening. He moved with the kind of controlled purpose that suggested he knew exactly where he was going and why. Tall, she registered. Dark coat, expensive looking even from a distance. He walked like someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Lena's first instinct was to look away, to avoid drawing attention to herself. She didn't need some stranger's pity or worse, some predator's interest. She just needed to disappear. Except the man didn't pass by. He stopped about 10 feet from her bench, hands in his coat pockets, his face partially shadowed despite the streetlight. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place, something that suggested money and education, but with edges that hinted at rougher origins. "I'm fine," Lena replied automatically, the lie transparent even to her own ears. She pulled her coat tighter, acutely aware of how she must look. Crying woman on park bench, clearly not fine by any definition. "No," the man said simply. "You're not." Something about the certainty in his tone sparked her anger back to life. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're freezing. I know you've been sitting on that bench for almost an hour. I know you're alone and upset, and that whatever you're holding is important enough that you keep looking at it like it contains answers you don't want." He paused, his gaze steady. "I know you have nowhere to go, or you wouldn't still be here." The accuracy of his observation sent alarm bells ringing through Lena's exhausted mind. "Have you been watching me?" "Yes." The blunt admission should have terrified her. Instead, something about his honesty, the complete lack of pretense or excuse, kept her rooted to the bench. "Why?" He stepped closer, and the streetlight finally illuminated his face fully. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair silvering slightly at the temples, and features that might have been handsome if they weren't so carefully controlled. Everything about him spoke of discipline and power, from the way he held himself to the quality of his clothes. But it was his eyes that held Lena's attention, dark, assessing, and carrying a weight of knowledge that suggested he'd seen far worse than a crying woman on a park bench. "Because you looked like someone who needed someone to notice," he said quietly. "And I notice things other people miss." Lena didn't know what to say to that. The statement was strange, almost unsettling, but there was no malice in it, just observation, fact. "I don't need help," she tried again, even though they both knew it was a lie. "Everyone needs help sometimes." He pulled one hand from his pocket, revealing a business card that he held out to her. "My name is Victor Salerno. I own several businesses in the city. If you need work, a place to stay, anything, call that number." Lena stared at the card but didn't take it. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "No," Victor agreed, "but I know what it looks like when someone's out of options. And I know that you deserve better than freezing to death in Central Park because the people who should have protected you failed." The words hit harder than Lena expected. She felt fresh tears threaten and hated herself for the weakness. "I don't accept charity." "It's not charity." It's an offer of employment. I need someone I can trust for a legitimate position. You need stability. We both get something out of the arrangement." He set the card on the bench beside the pregnancy test, his eyes flickering to it briefly before returning to her face. "Think about it. The offer stands regardless of your situation." He'd seen the test. Of course he had. Lena felt humiliation burn through her chest, mixing with the anger and fear and exhaustion until she couldn't separate one emotion from another. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "No," Victor said again. "But you will, if you make the call. The choice is yours, Lena. It always will be." He turned and walked away before she could ask how he knew her name, his footsteps fading back into the darkness he'd emerged from. Lena sat frozen, staring at the business card lying on the bench. Victor Salerno, private consulting. And a phone number, nothing else. She picked up the card with trembling fingers, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed that accepting help from a stranger was dangerous, especially one who admitted to watching her. But every practical reality screamed louder. She had no money, no home, no options, and a baby growing inside her that would need all three. The pregnancy test sat beside her like a ticking clock. Every second that passed was a second closer to impossible decisions. Keep the baby or don't. Tell Ethan or don't. Accept help from a stranger or don't. Lena had spent 3 years making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating. She'd erased her own needs in service of Ethan's dreams, had believed that loving him meant sacrificing herself. And where had that gotten her? Alone, pregnant, homeless. Maybe it was time to stop being the person everyone else needed her to be and start fighting for herself. For the life growing inside her. For a future that didn't involve freezing to death on a park bench. Her fingers closed around the business card. 3 days later, Lena stood outside an office building in Midtown, Victor Salerno's business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She'd spent the last 72 hours in a women's shelter, surrounded by others whose lives had also imploded, and every minute had reinforced what she already knew. She couldn't do this alone. The building before her was exactly what she'd expected from someone like Victor. Sleek, modern, expensive. The kind of place where the doorman looked at her worn coat and secondhand boots with barely concealed judgment. Lena lifted her chin and walked inside anyway. "I have an appointment with Victor Salerno," she told the receptionist, her voice steadier than she felt. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Name?" "Lena Moore." Something changed in the receptionist's expression. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. She picked up the phone, murmured something Lena couldn't hear, then nodded. 30th floor. He's expecting you." The elevator ride felt endless. Lena watched the numbers climb, each floor taking her further from the ground, from safety, from the option to change her mind. By the time the doors opened, her heart was hammering against her ribs. Victor's office occupied the entire 30th floor. Windows overlooked Manhattan, the city sprawling beneath like something conquerable. And there, standing by those windows with his back to her, was Victor himself. "You came," he said without turning around. "You knew I would. I hoped you would." He turned then, and Lena saw the same controlled intensity she remembered from the park. But hope and certainty are different things. "Thank you for calling." Lena stayed near the elevator, not quite ready to fully commit to entering his space. "I need to understand what you're offering. You said employment, but what kind of employment? And why me? You could hire anyone." "I could," Victor agreed, "but I don't trust easily, and I don't offer help lightly. What I saw in that park was someone who'd been betrayed by people who should have protected her. Someone strong enough to survive it but drowning because she had no resources. I respect that kind of strength. You don't know anything about my situation." "Don't I?" Victor moved away from the windows, crossing to his desk with that same purposeful stride. "Your husband left you 3 weeks ago. His name is Ethan Moore, and he works in finance, or he did until he quit to move across the country with someone else. You were evicted from your apartment because he stopped paying rent. You have no family in the city, few friends, and approximately $15 to your name." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "And you're pregnant with his child, though he doesn't know it yet." Lena's blood ran cold. How do you... I make it my business to know things, Lena, especially before I bring someone into my life. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Please, sit. Let me explain what I'm offering. She should have run. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to get out, to not get involved with someone who had that much information about her private life. But Lena's options had narrowed to almost nothing, and she was tired of running from hard truths. She sat. Victor settled into his own chair, elbows on the desk, fingers steepled in front of him. I need someone to manage my personal affairs. Schedule, correspondence, travel arrangements. The work itself is straightforward, but it requires discretion and loyalty. In exchange, I'm offering you a salary of $100,000 annually, health insurance that includes full prenatal and maternity coverage, and an apartment in a building I own. Lena's mouth went dry. That's too much. For administrative work. It's what the position is worth to me, Victor said simply. And what you're worth if you accept. Why? The question burst out of her. Why would you do this for a stranger? Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her with that unnerving intensity. Because I understand what it's like to have nothing, to be at the mercy of people who should care but don't. And because I see in you something most people miss. You're not a victim waiting to be saved, Lena. You're a survivor waiting for a chance to fight back. He paused. I'm offering you that chance. What you do with it is your choice. Lena's hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them together, trying to still the shaking. And what do you get out of this? Really? Honestly? Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Someone loyal. Someone who understands that life isn't fair and that sometimes you have to make hard choices to survive. I don't need someone who'll judge me or question my methods. I need someone who'll do their job and trust that I have my reasons for the decisions I make. It wasn't a complete answer, and they both knew it, but it was honest enough that Lena could work with it. What kind of businesses do you run? She asked carefully. Consulting, acquisitions, import-export, nothing illegal. Victor added, reading the question in her eyes. But not everything I do is conventional. The work sometimes requires discretion. Can you accept that? Lena thought about the shelter she'd left that morning, about the pregnancy test still tucked in her pocket, about the future stretching ahead of her, dark and uncertain and terrifying. Yes, she said quietly, I can accept that. Victor smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less dangerous. Good. When can you start? Now. The word came out as a question, uncertain. Now works. Victor stood, extending his hand across the desk. Welcome to your new life, Lena Moore. I promise you won't regret this. Lena took his hand, his grip warm and solid and surprisingly gentle. As their palms connected, she felt the last of her old life falling away. Whatever came next, whatever Victor Salerno's world held, it had to be better than the alternative. She just hoped she wasn't trading one kind of trap for another. 2 weeks later, Lena stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her new apartment, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. 2 weeks of regular meals had brought color back to her cheeks. 2 weeks of safety had erased the constant tension from her shoulders. 2 weeks of working for Victor Salerno had revealed exactly how much her old life had been slowly killing her. The apartment itself was modest but perfect. 1 bedroom, clean, in a building with security and heat that actually worked. Compared to the cramped, drafty place she'd shared with Ethan, it felt like luxury. Compared to the shelter, it felt like a miracle. But it was the work that surprised her most. Victor had been honest about the job requirements. She managed his schedule, screened his calls, arranged his meetings, and handled correspondence. The work itself was exactly what he'd promised. Administrative, straightforward, professional. It was everything else about Victor Salerno that kept Lena off balance. He was unfailingly polite but never warm, observant to a degree that bordered on unsettling. He noticed when she skipped meals, when she was tired, when the morning sickness made her nauseous. He noticed everything, filed it away behind those dark, assessing eyes, and adjusted accordingly. After the 3rd day of watching her turn green during their morning meeting, he'd had ginger tea and crackers delivered to her desk without comment. When she'd thanked him, He'd simply nodded and continued discussing his schedule as if providing for her comfort was the most natural thing in the world. He never asked about the pregnancy, never pushed for details about Ethan or her past. But somehow, Lena knew he was aware of everything. The way he watched her, the way he anticipated her needs before she voiced them, it suggested a level of attention that should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel seen for the first time in years. "You're being ridiculous," Lena told her reflection firmly. "He's your boss. He's paying you to do a job. Don't confuse professional courtesy with actual care." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't quite true. Victor's attention felt personal in a way that had nothing to do with employment. He looked at her like she mattered, like her well-being was somehow important beyond her utility. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. A knock on her apartment door interrupted her thoughts. Lena glanced at the clock, 9 p.m., too late for casual visitors. Caution made her check the peephole before opening the door. Victor stood in the hallway, still in his suit from work, looking as controlled and composed as ever. Lena's heart kicked against her ribs as she opened the door. "Mr. Salerno, is everything all right?" "Victor," he corrected gently, as he had every time she used his last name. "And no, everything is not all right. May I come in?" She stepped aside, hyper-aware of his presence as he entered her small apartment. He seemed to fill the space, his controlled energy making even the modest living room feel smaller. "What's wrong?" Lena asked, closing the door. Victor turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like hesitation cross his features. "I had you investigated," he said bluntly. "More thoroughly than I initially admitted, and there's information you need to know about your ex-husband." Lena's stomach dropped. "What kind of information?" "Ethan Moore knew you were pregnant before he left you." The words hit like a physical blow. Lena gripped the back of the couch for support, her mind refusing to process what Victor had just said. "That's not possible. I didn't know until 3 weeks after he left," Victor finished. "But he knew before that. Your medical records from a clinic visit 4 weeks ago. He accessed them through your shared insurance. He knew, Lena, and he left anyway." The room tilted. Lena sank onto the couch, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "You're lying. You have to be lying." "I wish I was." Victor moved to the coffee table, setting down a folder she hadn't noticed him carrying. "It's all documented. Insurance access logs, clinic records showing his login. He knew you were pregnant with his child, and he chose to abandon you anyway." Lena's hands shook as she opened the folder. The documents inside were exactly what Victor described. Cold clinical proof that Ethan had known about the pregnancy and had decided she wasn't worth staying for. That their child wasn't worth staying for. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would he do that?" "Because some people are fundamentally selfish," Victor said quietly. He sat beside her on the couch, maintaining a careful distance. "Because he prioritized his own happiness over his responsibilities. Because he's a coward who couldn't face the consequences of his choices." Tears streamed down Lena's face, hot and angry and devastating. She'd spent weeks trying to understand Ethan's abandonment, trying to find some explanation that made sense. But this was beyond comprehension. He'd known about the baby and had chosen to leave anyway. "I hate him," she whispered. "I hate him so much." "You have that right," Victor said. His voice was soft but carried an edge of steel. "And you have the right to ensure he never has the power to hurt you or your child again." Lena looked up at him through her tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Ethan Moore needs to understand exactly what he's lost, what he threw away. And more importantly, he needs to understand that you and your child are under my protection now." Victor's dark eyes held hers. "If you want my help making that clear, you have it. If you'd rather handle this yourself, I respect that. But either way, he doesn't get to walk away from this without consequences." Something fierce and desperate bloomed in Lena's chest. For the first time since Ethan had left, she didn't feel powerless. She felt angry, and that anger felt like strength. "What kind of consequences?" she asked. Victor smiled, and it wasn't kind. "The kind that ensure he never forgets what he gave up. The kind that guarantee your child grows up protected, provided for, and completely beyond his reach unless you choose otherwise." He paused. "The kind that make it clear you're not alone anymore, Lena. You have someone in your corner now, and that someone doesn't lose. It should have scared her, the intensity in his voice, the promise of violence, not physical, but just as devastating, hanging in the air between them. But Lena was so tired of being afraid, so tired of being the one who lost while everyone else walked away unscathed. "Okay," she said softly. "Help me." Victor reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was surprisingly tender, at odds with everything else about him. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. "Stronger than Ethan, stronger than the fear. You survived being abandoned while pregnant with nothing but your courage. That kind of strength is rare, Lena. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Lena closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his palm against her face. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with gentleness, so long since anyone had looked at her like she was valuable. "Why do you care?" she asked, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Really, Victor, why does any of this matter to you?" Victor's hand dropped, but he didn't look away. "Because I know what it's like to be disposable, to be nothing in the eyes of people who should have protected you. And I know how it feels to have someone step in and change everything, to be given a chance when you expected only cruelty." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You remind me of someone I used to be, and I have the power to ensure you never have to feel powerless again. Why wouldn't I use it?" It wasn't a complete answer. Lena suspected Victor Salerno never gave complete answers about anything. But it was enough. Enough to understand that his interest in her went deeper than employment. Enough to recognize that he'd chosen her specifically, deliberately, for reasons that had as much to do with her as with whatever he needed from an assistant. "Thank you," she said simply. Victor stood, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we handle Ethan Moore. And Lena?" He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Whatever happens next, remember that you're not the one who should feel ashamed. He is. Make sure he knows that." After he left, Lena sat alone in her apartment, the folder of evidence still open on the coffee table. She stared at the documents proving Ethan's betrayal, and something hardened inside her chest. She'd spent 3 years making herself small for a man who had never valued her. She'd sacrificed her dreams, her independence, her sense of self, all for someone who had known she was carrying his child and had abandoned her anyway. No more. Lena Moore had died in that park 3 weeks ago, alone and terrified and powerless. What had risen in her place was something harder, sharper, less willing to accept cruelty as inevitable. And she had Victor Salerno standing beside her now, offering not rescue but partnership. Offering not pity but respect. Whatever came next, whatever darkness lived in Victor's world, it couldn't be worse than what she'd already survived. Lena placed one hand on her stomach, feeling the first flutter of protective fury for the life growing there. "Your father is a coward," she whispered to her unborn child. "But you're going to have a mother who fights, and you're going to grow up knowing that you were never the mistake. He was." Outside her window, the city glittered with 1,000 lights, each one a story of survival and struggle and second chances. Lena Moore was about to write her own. The morning arrived cold and sharp, winter sunlight cutting through Lena's apartment windows with a clarity that matched her newfound resolve. She'd barely slept, her mind circling around the evidence Victor had provided, around the truth she'd been too naive to see. Ethan had known. He'd known about their child and had chosen to walk away anyway, leaving her to drown while he sailed off toward his own happiness. Lena stood in front of her closet, selecting clothes with more care than usual. Victor had texted her at 6 a.m. with simple instructions. "Dress professionally. We have a meeting at 10. She didn't need to ask who the meeting was with. By 9:30, Lena stood in Victor's office, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide their trembling. Victor sat behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the other end. She'd learned over the past 2 weeks that he conducted business in at least 4 languages, switching between them with an ease that suggested his world extended far beyond Manhattan. He ended the call and looked up at her, his dark eyes assessing. "Are you ready?" "I don't know what I'm supposed to be ready for," Lena admitted. "You haven't told me what you're planning." "Because what happens next is your choice, not mine. Victor stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced efficiency. I've arranged for Ethan Moore to meet with me this morning. He thinks I'm a potential investor in whatever venture he's pursuing with his girlfriend. He doesn't know you'll be here. Lena's stomach twisted. You want me to confront him? I want you to have the option to confront him, to see his face when he realizes you're not the broken woman he left behind, to watch him understand that his choices have consequences. Victor moved around the desk, stopping a few feet from her. But if you'd rather not face him, if you'd rather I handle this alone, that's equally acceptable. The decision is yours, Lena. It always will be. The phrase echoed from their first meeting in the park. The choice is yours. Victor seemed to build everything around that principle, offering options, presenting possibilities, but never forcing her hand. It was intoxicating after 3 years of Ethan making decisions for both of them without consultation. I want to be there, Lena said firmly. I want him to see me. Victor smiled, a flash of approval in his otherwise controlled expression. Good, but we establish ground rules first. You don't speak unless you choose to. You don't apologize, don't explain, don't justify anything about your situation. If he asks questions, you're under no obligation to answer them. And if at any point you want to leave, you leave. I'll handle the rest. What exactly will you be handling? Justice, Victor said simply. The kind that men like Ethan Moore understand, consequences delivered by someone with more power than they have. He abandoned his pregnant wife to destitution. That's not something I forgive easily. There was something dark in Victor's voice, something that suggested his definition of consequences went deeper than Lena fully understood. But she found she didn't care. Ethan deserved whatever Victor had planned. He'd earned it by accessing her medical records, by knowing about their child, by leaving her anyway. Okay, Lena said. I'm ready. 20 minutes later, Lena sat in a chair positioned slightly behind and to the left of Victor's desk, arranged so she'd be visible but not immediately noticeable when someone entered the office. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she heard voices in the reception area. Victor's assistant greeting someone, professional and courteous. Then the office door opened, and Ethan Moore walked in. Lena's breath caught. She hadn't seen him in nearly a month, and the sight of him sent a cascade of conflicting emotions through her chest. He looked good, rested, happy, like a man whose life was finally aligning with his desires. He wore a new suit she'd never seen, his hair freshly cut, his entire demeanor radiating confidence. He looked like someone who'd never spent a single night worrying about what he'd left behind. Mr. Salerno, Ethan said, extending his hand with practiced charm. Thank you for taking this meeting. I think you'll find our business proposal very compelling. Victor stood but didn't take Ethan's hand. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss. It was only as Ethan settled into the chair that he noticed Lena. She watched the recognition hit him, watched his expression cycle through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been guilt before settling into uncomfortable neutrality. Lena, he said carefully, I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly, Victor said before Lena could respond. His voice was pleasant, conversational, but carried an undercurrent of steel. Mr. Moore, I'm afraid I haven't been entirely forthcoming about the nature of this meeting. I'm not actually interested in your business proposal. Ethan's attention snapped back to Victor, wariness creeping into his expression. I don't understand. Allow me to clarify. Victor leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Lena Moore works for me. Has for the past 2 weeks. In that time, I've come to know quite a bit about her situation, including how she ended up homeless and pregnant after her husband abandoned her without warning or support. The color drained from Ethan's face. His eyes darted to Lena, then back to Victor. That's a private matter between me and my wife. Ex-wife, Lena said quietly, speaking for the first time. I filed for divorce last week. She hadn't, actually. Didn't have the money for a lawyer yet, but watching Ethan flinch at the statement felt satisfying in a way she hadn't anticipated. Lena, listen, Ethan started, but Victor cut him off. You don't speak to her unless she addresses you directly, Victor said, his tone dropping several degrees. You lost that privilege when you accessed her medical records. discovered she was pregnant with your child, and chose to abandon her anyway. Ethan went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult our intelligence. Victor opened a folder on his desk, the same one he'd shown Lena the night before. Insurance access logs, clinic records showing your login credentials. You knew she was pregnant 4 weeks ago. You knew, and you left her homeless anyway. He paused, letting the words settle. Did you tell Claire about the baby? Or did you conveniently forget to mention that detail when you were rebuilding your great love story? How do you... Ethan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. You have no right to investigate my private life. I have every right to protect my employees, Victor countered. And Lena is my employee now, which means her well-being is my concern, which means you've become my concern, Mr. Moore. Lena watched Ethan process this information, watched him realize that he'd walked into something far more complicated than he'd anticipated. His eyes kept darting to her, looking for some kind of alliance or understanding, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't show weakness, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he'd destroyed her. Look, Ethan said finally, addressing Victor rather than Lena. I made a difficult choice. It wasn't easy, but I had to follow my heart. Lena deserves someone who can love her completely, and I couldn't be that person. Staying would have been unfair to both of us. How noble, Victor said dryly. And draining your joint bank account, leaving her to face eviction alone? That was also for her benefit? I didn't... Ethan stopped, seeming to realize that denial was pointless. I needed that money for the move, to start fresh with Claire. Lena would have fought the divorce, would have made everything complicated. I thought if I just left, it would be cleaner for everyone. Cleaner, Lena repeated, the word tasting bitter. She leaned forward slightly, finally letting Ethan see the full weight of her anger. You thought abandoning your pregnant wife with no money, no home, and no warning would be cleaner? I didn't know you were pregnant when I left, Ethan protested, but the lie was transparent even as he spoke it. Yes, you did. Lena's voice was steady now, strengthened by fury. You accessed my medical records. You knew exactly what you were leaving behind. You knew about your child, and you decided we weren't worth staying for. Ethan's jaw worked silently. For the first time since entering the office, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Lena, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I panicked. I didn't know how to handle it. So you ran, Victor said flatly. Like a coward. And now you're here trying to pitch business proposals and build a new life, while the woman carrying your child was sleeping in a shelter 2 weeks ago. Ethan's head snapped toward Lena, genuine shock crossing his features. A shelter? Lena, I didn't know it was that bad. You didn't want to know, Lena corrected. You made sure you wouldn't have to know by disappearing completely. You blocked my number, didn't you, after you left? The guilt on Ethan's face was answer enough. I needed a clean break, he said weakly. You thought only about yourself, Victor interrupted. Which brings us to why you're really here, Mr. Moore. Not for a business meeting, but for a conversation about consequences and responsibilities. Ethan's expression hardened, some of his earlier confidence returning. With all due respect, Mr. Salerno, my relationship with Lena is none of your business. Whatever arrangement you have with her is between the two of you. Wrong. Victor's voice went cold. You made it my business the moment you left her vulnerable, and now you're going to make a choice, Mr. Moore. You're going to decide right now what role, if any, you want in this child's life. Because I promise you, the consequences of that choice will be permanent. Lena felt her pulse quicken. She hadn't expected Victor to push this hard, this fast. But watching Ethan squirm under that dark, assessing gaze, she found she didn't want to stop it. What are you talking about? Ethan asked, but uncertainty crept into his voice. I'm talking about the fact that you have a child on the way, a child you helped create and then abandoned. You can either step up and be a father with all the legal and financial responsibilities that entails, or you can walk away permanently. Victor leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. But if you choose to walk away, you sign away all parental rights, permanently. You don't get to come back in 5 years and decide you want to play daddy. You don't get to use this child as leverage or guilt. You make your choice now, and you live with it forever. Ethan's mouth opened and closed several times. He looked at Lena, real fear in his eyes now. Lena, you can't be okay with this. This is our child. Our baby. Our baby, Lena repeated softly. The baby you knew about when you left me homeless. The baby you were willing to pretend didn't exist so you could have your fresh start with Claire. She paused, letting him see the depth of her contempt. You gave up the right to call this child ours the moment you walked out, Ethan. Now you have to decide if you want any rights at all. This is insane, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're trying to force me into an impossible decision. No, Victor said calmly. I'm offering you a choice, the same choice you offered Lena when you abandoned her, adapt or suffer the consequences. The difference is, I'm giving you more warning than you gave her. The room fell silent. Lena watched Ethan struggle, watched him weigh his options, and felt a strange detachment settle over her. This was the man she'd loved, the man she'd built her entire life around, and he was sitting here calculating whether his child was worth the inconvenience of responsibility. If I sign away my rights, Ethan said slowly, what happens then? Then you're free, Victor said simply. No financial obligations, no custody battles, no complications. You get to live your life with Claire as if this pregnancy never happened. And Lena gets to raise her child without wondering when you'll decide to disrupt their lives. And if I don't sign? Then you step up. Fully, child support, custody arrangements, all of it. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of fatherhood suit you. It's all or nothing, Mr. Moore. Lena held her breath, waiting. Some part of her, the part that had loved Ethan, that had believed in their future, hoped he'd choose to stay. Hoped he'd prove that underneath the cowardice and selfishness, there was still a decent man capable of loving his child. But the larger part of her, the part that had been forged in the cold reality of abandonment, knew exactly what he'd choose. I need time to think, Ethan said finally. No, Victor replied. You need to decide now, because the moment you leave this office, the offer expires. You either commit to being a father, with all the legal documentation that requires, or you sign the papers my lawyers have prepared terminating your parental rights. Those are your options. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't force me to make a decision like this right now. This is my child too. Is it? Victor's question was quiet but devastating. Because your actions suggest otherwise. A father doesn't abandon his pregnant partner. A father doesn't drain bank accounts and disappear. A father doesn't need to be threatened with consequences to care about his child's welfare. He paused. You're not a father, Mr. Moore. You're a sperm donor who's inconvenienced by the results. The only question is whether you're going to pretend otherwise or accept the truth. The words hung in the air, brutal and unanswerable. Lena watched Ethan's face cycle through anger, shame, and finally resignation. She saw the exact moment he made his decision, saw it in the way his shoulders dropped, and his expression went carefully blank. Where do I sign? Ethan asked quietly. Something inside Lena's chest cracked, even though she'd known it was coming, even though she'd wanted him to make this choice, had hoped for the clean break it represented. Hearing him actually say it, hearing him choose abandonment again, this time with full knowledge and conscious intent, hurt in ways she hadn't prepared for. Victor pulled out a document from his desk drawer, sliding it across to Ethan along with a pen. Read it carefully. Once you sign, it's irrevocable. You give up all rights to this child. No custody, no visitation, no legal claim of any kind. In exchange, you have no financial obligations and no responsibilities. Ethan picked up the papers with shaking hands. Lena watched him read through them, watched him realize the magnitude of what he was doing. For a moment, she thought he might change his mind, might remember the life they'd planned together, the family they'd talked about creating. But then he signed his name at the bottom of the page, quick and decisive, like ripping off a bandage. There, Ethan said, setting down the pen. He wouldn't meet Lena's eyes. It's done. Are we finished here? Almost. Victor took the papers, examining the signature briefly before setting them aside. One more thing, Mr. Moore. If you ever contact Lena again, if you ever attempt to interfere in her life or her child's life, you'll discover that I'm significantly less forgiving than I've been today. Do you understand? There was something lethal in Victor's voice, a promise of violence that made even Lena's skin prickle with awareness. Ethan clearly heard it too, because he went pale. I understand, he said. Good. Then you can leave. Ethan stood, hesitated like he wanted to say something to Lena, then thought better of it. He walked to the door, his movements stiff and awkward. Just before he left, he paused and looked back at her. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I hope things work out for you, Lena. I really do. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Lena sat frozen in her chair, staring at the space where Ethan had been. She felt numb, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed something vital. She'd gotten what she wanted, freedom from Ethan, protection for her child, a clean break from the past. So why did it feel like losing? Lena. Victor's voice was gentle. He moved from behind his desk to crouch in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. Breathe. She realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky exhale, and then the tears came. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet, devastating tears that tracked down her face in hot streams. He didn't even fight, she whispered. Not even a little. His own child, and he just signed it away. I know. Victor reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was becoming familiar, his way of offering comfort without overwhelming her. And I know that hurts, even though you knew it was coming, even though it's what you wanted. Is this what I wanted? Lena's voice broke. For my child to grow up knowing their father chose to walk away? That he had a chance to stay and he didn't take it? Your child will grow up knowing their father was a coward, Victor said firmly. But they'll also grow up knowing their mother was strong enough to protect them from that cowardice. Strong enough to choose their well-being over the fantasy of a happy family with someone who didn't deserve them. He paused. You gave Ethan a choice, Lena. He made it. That's on him, not you. Lena knew he was right. Logically, she understood that Ethan's decision reflected his character, not hers. But logic didn't ease the ache in her chest, the grief for what should have been. What happens now? She asked. Victor stood, returning to his desk and retrieving the signed documents. Now these get filed with my lawyers. The termination of parental rights will be processed, and you move forward without Ethan Moore in your life, or your child's life. You're free, Lena, completely free. Free. The word should have felt liberating, but instead it felt heavy with responsibility. She was free, yes, free to make her own choices, free to build her own life. But she was also alone, pregnant, and entirely responsible for another human being's future. As if reading her thoughts, Victor said, You're not alone in this. Lena looked up at him, confusion and wariness warring in her expression. What do you mean? I mean that I don't offer protection halfway. You work for me, which means you're under my care. That extends to your child, medical bills, childcare, whatever you need. You have it. No questions asked. Victor, I can't accept. Yes, you can. His voice was firm, but not unkind. And you will, because it's not charity and it's not pity. It's what you've earned by being loyal, by being strong, by refusing to break even when you had every reason to. He paused. Let me be clear, Lena. I don't do things out of the goodness of my heart. I do things because they serve my interests, and keeping you stable, protected, and focused serves my interests. So accept the help and stop arguing. It was possibly the most Victor way of offering kindness Lena had ever heard, wrapped in pragmatism and self-interest, but sincere underneath. She found herself smiling despite the tears still wet on her face. You're a very strange man, Victor Salerno, she said. So I've been told. He returned to his chair, settling back into his professional demeanor like putting on armor. Take the rest of the day off. Go home, rest, process what just happened. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out what comes next. Lena nodded, standing on unsteady legs. She made it halfway to the door before turning back. Victor, thank you for everything. He looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and for just a moment, His careful control slipped enough for her to see something deeper, something that looked almost like tenderness. "You're welcome, Lena. Now go home before I change my mind about the day off." She left, but the warmth of his concern followed her all the way back to her apartment. That night, Lena sat by her window looking out at the city, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. The signed papers terminating Ethan's parental rights sat on her coffee table, legally binding proof that her child's father had chosen to walk away. But mixed with the grief was something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Because Ethan's absence meant her child would never know the pain of loving someone who only loved conditionally, would never wonder if they were enough because their mother had already proven they were worth everything. And they had Victor Salerno, for whatever that was worth. A man who didn't claim to love them, but who protected them anyway. Who noticed when she needed help and provided it without expectation of gratitude. Who had given her the power to face her demons and the freedom to choose her own future. Lena thought about the way Victor had wiped away her tears, the gentleness in his touch at odds with everything else about him. She thought about how he'd positioned himself between her and Ethan like a shield, how he'd fought her battles while still giving her room to fight her own. She didn't know what Victor wanted from her beyond professional competence, didn't know if his protection came with strings she hadn't yet discovered. But for now, for tonight, she let herself feel grateful, let herself believe that maybe, somehow, she and her child would be okay. Outside, the city glittered with a million possibilities. And inside, Lena Moore began to believe that some of those possibilities might actually belong to her. The weeks that followed Ethan's departure from their lives settled into a rhythm Lena hadn't expected. One defined not by the chaos she'd grown accustomed to, but by stability. Victor kept his word about everything. Her salary appeared in her account with clockwork precision. Her apartment remained warm and safe, and the prenatal care he'd promised materialized in the form of appointments with one of Manhattan's top obstetricians, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who never once asked questions about Lena's situation that weren't medically relevant. Lena threw herself into work with an intensity that surprised even her. She learned the intricacies of Victor's schedule, the subtle preferences he never voiced but expected her to know. She discovered he took his coffee black in the morning but with cream after 3 p.m., that he conducted his most sensitive business calls in Italian, that Tuesdays were reserved for meetings he never put on the official calendar, with people whose names she was instructed never to write down. She didn't ask what those meetings were about. Some part of her didn't want to know. Victor had been clear from the beginning that his business required discretion, and Lena had learned that discretion meant not asking questions she couldn't unhear the answers to. But it was the small moments that stayed with her. The way Victor would appear at her desk at exactly noon with takeout from whatever restaurant served food she could stomach that day. How he'd rearranged his schedule without comment to ensure she never missed a prenatal appointment. The evening she'd stayed late finishing a report and had found him still in his office at 9 p.m., working in the pool of light from his desk lamp, and he'd looked up and simply said, "Go home, Lena. The work will be here tomorrow." She'd gone home, but she'd thought about that moment for hours afterward. Thought about the quiet concern in his voice, the way he seemed to notice everything about her well-being while revealing almost nothing about himself. It was dangerous, this growing attachment to Victor Salerno. Lena knew it intellectually, could list all the reasons why allowing herself to care about her employer, especially one as complex and potentially dangerous as Victor, was a mistake. But knowing something and feeling it were different things, and what Lena felt when she looked at Victor was becoming harder to ignore. The realization crystallized one afternoon in late February, nearly 6 weeks after Ethan had signed away his parental rights. Lena stood in Victor's office reviewing his schedule for the following week when she felt it. A flutter, subtle and strange, like bubbles rising in her abdomen. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, now showing the first gentle curve of pregnancy beneath her blouse. The sensation came again, unmistakable this time. Movement. Her baby, making its presence known for the first time. "Lena?" Victor's voice cut through her distraction. "Are you all right?" She looked up to find him watching her with that characteristic intensity, his dark eyes missing nothing. She should have lied, should have brushed it off as nothing. Instead, she found herself smiling with wonder she couldn't contain. "The baby just moved," she said softly. "I felt it move for the first time." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or something deeper that he quickly masked. He stood from his desk, crossing to where she stood with measured steps. Is that normal? He asked. At this stage? Dr. Chen said it could happen any time between 16 and 20 weeks. I'm 18 weeks now, so Lena trailed off, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. It's normal. Good, actually. It means everything is progressing the way it should. Victor nodded slowly, his gaze dropping briefly to her stomach before returning to her face. And you're feeling well otherwise? No complications? I'm fine, Lena assured him. Better than fine, actually. The morning sickness is gone. Dr. Chen says the baby is healthy. Everything is exactly as it should be. Good. The word came out rougher than usual. Victor cleared his throat, stepping back to restore the professional distance that had momentarily collapsed. That's good, Lena. I'm glad. But he didn't return to his desk. Instead, he stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The silence stretched between them, weighted with things neither of them seemed willing to say. Victor, Lena began, then hesitated. She didn't know how to articulate what she wanted to ask, how to voice the question that had been growing in her mind for weeks. Why are you doing all of this? Really? And please don't tell me it's because I'm a good employee or because it serves your interests. I need to understand what this is. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a long moment, Lena thought he wouldn't answer, that he'd retreat behind his usual deflections. But then he spoke, his voice quiet and more honest than she'd ever heard it. When I was 15, my mother got pregnant, he said. My father had been gone for years. Dead, probably, though we never knew for sure. She was working 3 jobs trying to keep us fed, and then she got pregnant by some man who promised he'd take care of us and then disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. Victor's expression hardened at the memory. She tried to handle it alone, tried to be strong, and she died in childbirth because she couldn't afford proper medical care. The baby died too. Lena's breath caught. Victor, I'm so sorry. I was there, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. 15 years old, watching my mother bleed out because the father of her child was too much of a coward to take responsibility. Watching the doctors work on a baby that never drew breath because we couldn't afford the prenatal care that might have caught the complications earlier. His dark eyes met hers, raw with old pain. So when I see a pregnant woman abandoned by a coward, when I see someone trying to survive alone because the person who should have protected her chose himself instead, I don't have the luxury of looking away. I can't. Do you understand? Lena felt tears prick her eyes. She'd known Victor's help came from somewhere personal, had sensed the weight of experience behind his actions. But hearing the truth laid bare like this, seeing the grief he carried, it recontextualized everything. You saved me because you couldn't save them, she said softly. No. Victor's voice turned sharp. I helped you because you deserved help, because you were strong enough to survive but shouldn't have had to do it alone. Don't diminish what you are by making this only about my past, Lena. You matter beyond what you represent to me. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. Lena took a step closer, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Do I? She asked quietly. Matter to you, I mean. Beyond the job, beyond the arrangement we have. Victor's expression shuddered, his control snapping back into place like armor. You're my employee, Lena, and someone under my protection. That's all this needs to be. But is it all it is? The question hung in the air, dangerous and impossible to take back. Lena watched Victor struggle with it, watched him weigh his response. For a moment, she thought he might actually answer honestly, might acknowledge the strange intimacy that had grown between them, the way they'd started existing in each other's orbits with an intensity that went beyond professional courtesy. But then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Victor glanced at the screen, and whatever vulnerability had shown in his expression disappeared completely. I need to take this, he said, his tone formal. We'll continue reviewing the schedule later. It was a dismissal, polite but absolute. Lena nodded and left his office, her heart racing with a mixture of emotions she couldn't untangle. She'd pushed too hard, asked for too much. Victor Salerno was her employer, her protector, the man who'd saved her from destitution. He couldn't be, anything more than that, no matter how much she was starting to wish otherwise. That evening, Lena found herself unable to settle. She tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to do anything that would quiet her racing thoughts, but her mind kept circling back to Victor's words, to the pain in his voice when he'd spoken about his mother, to the look in his eyes when he'd told her she mattered. Around 8 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text. Victor's name appeared on the screen, and Lena's pulse quickened as she opened the message. "I apologize for ending our conversation abruptly. Can we talk? I'm still at the office if you're available." Lena stared at the message for a long moment, weighing her options. The smart choice would be to decline, to maintain professional boundaries, to not complicate an already complex situation. But Lena had been making smart choices her entire life, and it had gotten her abandoned and pregnant and alone. Maybe it was time to make a different kind of choice. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door. The office building was mostly empty when Lena arrived, just security in the lobby and the occasional light from windows where someone else was working late. She rode the elevator to the 30th floor, her heart hammering with each ascending number. Victor's office door was open. He stood by the windows overlooking the city, his jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up, the most casual she'd ever seen him. He turned when she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You came," he said. "You asked me to." Lena closed the door behind her, leaning against it for support. "What did you want to talk about?" Victor crossed to his desk, poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher he kept there, and handed one to her. His fingers brushed hers in the transfer, and Lena felt the contact like electricity. "I wanted to apologize," Victor said, "for shutting down earlier, for not answering your question honestly." "You don't owe me." "Yes, I do." He set his glass down, turning to face her fully. "You asked if you matter to me beyond the professional arrangement we have. And I deflected because the honest answer complicates things in ways I'm not sure either of us is ready for." Lena's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What's the honest answer?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, with something that sounded like confession. "The honest answer is that you've become more important to me than I intended. That somewhere between offering you a job and watching you rebuild your life, I stopped seeing you as just someone who needed protection. You're strong, Lena, stronger than you know. And you're kind despite having every reason to be bitter. You're building a future for your child with nothing but determination and courage, and that—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "That matters to me. You matter to me. More than is probably wise." Lena felt like she couldn't breathe. She set down her glass before she dropped it, her hands shaking. "Victor, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to pressure you or complicate your situation further. I just needed you to know that when I look at you, I don't just see an employee or someone under my protection. I see someone remarkable. Someone worth—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Someone worth more than I can offer." The last part came out quiet, almost defeated. Lena took a step toward him, driven by instinct rather than logic. "What if I get to decide what you can offer?" she asked softly. "What if I get to choose what matters?" Victor's expression turned pained. "You're pregnant with another man's child, Lena. You're vulnerable, rebuilding your life, dependent on me for your livelihood and your security. Any relationship between us would be inherently unequal. I won't take advantage of that, even if I'm asking you to. Especially then." But Victor's voice lacked conviction, and his eyes were fixed on her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. "You deserve someone uncomplicated, someone who can give you the normal life you should have had with Ethan. I'm not that person, Lena. My world is dark and dangerous, and bringing you deeper into it would be selfish." "I'm already in it," Lena pointed out. "I work for you. I live in a building you own. My child's future is secured because of your protection. If your world is dark and dangerous, I'm already standing in it. The only question is whether we keep pretending there's nothing between us or if we're honest about what this has become." Victor closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, Lena saw raw hunger there. Not just physical, though that was present too, but something deeper. The hunger of someone who'd been alone for too long, who'd convinced himself he didn't deserve connection. "I'm not a good man, Lena," he said quietly. "The things I've done, the choices I've made, you don't know the full extent. If you did, you might not look at me the way you're looking at me now. Then tell me." Lena took another step closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tell me who you really are, Victor. Let me make an informed choice about what I'm walking into." For a moment she thought he might actually do it, might lay bare all the secrets he kept locked behind those dark eyes. But then he reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him. "Not tonight," he said softly. "Tonight I just need to know. Is this what you really want? Not because you're grateful or because you think you owe me something, but because you genuinely want this?" Lena turned her face into his palm, letting herself feel the warmth of his skin against hers. "I want this," she whispered. "I want you. And I know that's probably insane given everything that's happened, given that I barely know you and I'm pregnant and my life is a mess. But I've spent the last 3 years denying what I wanted in favor of what I thought I should want. I'm done with that, Victor. If there's one thing Ethan taught me, it's that life is too short and too unpredictable to waste on shoulds." Victor's thumb traced along her cheekbone, and Lena saw something in his expression crack. The careful control giving way to something raw and real and achingly vulnerable. "You're going to regret this," he said, but it sounded like a plea, like he was begging her to prove him wrong. "Maybe," Lena agreed, "but I'd rather regret something I chose than something that was chosen for me. I'd rather take the risk than wonder what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." Victor's other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like she was something precious. "I can't promise you easy, Lena. I can't promise you simple or uncomplicated. All I can promise is that I will protect you and your child with everything I have. That I will be honest with you even when the truth is ugly. And that I will never, ever abandon you the way Ethan did." "That's all I need," Lena said, and meant it. She'd learned the hard way that promises of forever meant nothing, but promises of honesty, of protection, of choosing to stay even when things got difficult, those she could believe in. Victor leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Lena didn't pull away. She rose up on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like something inevitable. Like the culmination of every moment that had led them here, from that first night in the park to this instant. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning. But then Lena's hands found their way to Victor's shoulders, and his arms wrapped around her waist, and the gentleness gave way to hunger, to the raw need of two people who'd been alone too long, who'd been denying what they wanted out of fear or propriety or both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know," Lena replied. "Is that a problem?" "No." Victor's arms tightened around her, protective and possessive in equal measure. "No, it's not a problem. It's just, I need you to understand what you're getting into, my life, my business, the people I associate with. It's not the world you're used to, and once you're part of it, once people know you matter to me, that makes you a target." Lena pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "Then teach me. Teach me how to survive in your world. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be kept in the dark for my own protection, Victor. I'm stronger than that." Something like pride flickered across Victor's face. "Yes," he said. "You are." "All right, Lena. No more secrets between us, no more half-truths. You want to know who I really am? I'll show you, but you have to promise me something in return." "What?" "If it ever becomes too much, if you ever want out, you tell me. You don't suffer in silence trying to be strong enough to handle it. You tell me, and I will make sure you and your child are protected, even if that means protecting you from me. Promise me." Lena considered this, understanding the weight of what he was asking. He was offering her an escape route, insurance against the possibility that his world might destroy her. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her trust him more. "I promise," she said. "But Victor, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever darkness you think you're protecting me from, I can handle it. I've already survived the worst betrayal of my life. Everything else is just details." Victor's smile was small but genuine, the first truly unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "We'll see about that," he said. Then more seriously, "There's a dinner tomorrow night, business associates of mine. I was going to attend alone, but I'd like you to come with me. Not as my assistant, but as someone important to me. It will send a message to certain people, make your position in my life clear, but it also means stepping into my world fully. Are you ready for that?" Lena thought about everything that had led to this moment, about Ethan's betrayal and her own survival, about the child growing inside her who deserved a mother brave enough to choose her own path, about the man in front of her who'd shown her more genuine care in 2 months than her husband had in 3 years. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." Victor kissed her again, softer this time, like he was sealing a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm with something that looked almost like hope. "Then tomorrow night," he said, "you meet the real Victor Salerno. And Lena, I hope you meant what you said about being strong enough to handle it, because once you see the truth, there's no going back." Lena squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze with determination. "Good," she said. "I'm done with going back. From now on, I only move forward." And standing there in Victor's arms, overlooking a city full of possibilities and dangers in equal measure, Lena Moore meant every word. She'd been broken by betrayal, had rebuilt herself from nothing, and had found something unexpected in the process, not just safety or security, but the potential for something real. Whatever came next, whatever darkness Victor's world contained, she would face it with her eyes open and her heart finally willing to risk itself again. Because the alternative, staying safe but alone, protected but unfulfilled, wasn't living, it was just surviving, and Lena had done enough surviving to last a lifetime. The dress Victor had sent to her apartment that morning was black, elegant, and far more expensive than anything Lena had ever owned. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing the fabric over the gentle swell of her stomach, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Pregnancy had brought color to her cheeks, and a fullness to her features that softened the sharp edges fear and hunger had carved into her face over the past months. She looked healthy, strong, like someone who belonged in a dress that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. The car Victor sent arrived at 7. Lena gathered her courage along with her clutch and headed downstairs, her heart hammering with each step. This was it. The moment she stopped being just Victor's assistant and became something else entirely. Something public. Something that would bind her to him in ways she couldn't fully predict. Victor was waiting in the back of the town car, and when she slid in beside him, the look on his face made her breath catch. He'd always been handsome in that controlled, dangerous way of his, but tonight he looked at her like she was something miraculous. "You're stunning," he said quietly, his dark eyes tracing over her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. "It's the dress," Lena replied, suddenly self-conscious. "No." Victor reached over, taking her hand in his. "It's you. The dress just makes it obvious to everyone else." The drive to the restaurant took them to a part of Manhattan Lena had only ever seen from the outside. The kind of neighborhood where wealth whispered rather than shouted, where restaurants didn't have signs because if you needed to ask where they were, you couldn't afford to eat there. Victor helped her from the car, his hand settling at the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Inside, the restaurant was all dark wood and soft lighting, intimate in a way that suggested secrets shared over expensive wine. A host greeted Victor by name, leading them through the main dining room to a private area in the back. Lena felt eyes following them, assessing her, calculating what her presence at Victor Salerno's side meant. The private room held a single large table where 4 people were already seated. They looked up as Victor and Lena entered, and Lena felt herself being evaluated by gazes that missed nothing. "Victor," one of the men said, standing. He was perhaps 50, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from winters in warmer climates. "You're late. We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind about joining us." "Antonio," Victor replied smoothly. "I apologize. I was ensuring my guest was comfortable." He guided Lena forward with gentle pressure at her back. "Everyone, this is Lena Moore. Lena, allow me to introduce Antonio Ricci, his wife Sophia, Marcus Chen, and Yuki Tanaka. The names meant nothing to Lena, but the way Victor said them suggested they should. She smiled politely as each person acknowledged her with varying degrees of curiosity and calculation. Moore, Antonio repeated, his eyes sharp. Any relation to Ethan Moore? Works in finance? Recently relocated to California? Lena's smile froze. Victor's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her back, a silent message of support. My ex-husband, Lena said evenly. We're divorced. Ah. Something knowing flickered across Antonio's face. My apologies, I didn't mean to bring up uncomfortable history, but his tone suggested he'd meant to do exactly that, testing her reaction. Ancient history, Victor said, his voice carrying a warning edge. Lena works with me now, and she's under my protection. I trust that's clear to everyone here? The statement hung in the air, weighted with implications Lena didn't fully understand, but she watched the other people at the table process the information, watched them recalibrate their assessment of her. Sophia Ricci's expression softened slightly. Marcus Chen nodded with what looked like respect. Yuki Tanaka simply smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. Crystal clear, Antonio said finally, gesturing to the empty seats. Please, join us. We have much to discuss, and the night is young. As they settled into their chairs, Victor's hand found Lena's under the table, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, drawing strength from the contact. Whatever this dinner was really about, whatever test she was being subjected to, she wouldn't face it alone. The meal began with small talk, discussions of travel, of business ventures that sounded legitimate but felt like code for something else, of mutual acquaintances whose names Lena didn't recognize. She listened more than she spoke, trying to understand the dynamics at play. Antonio clearly held some kind of authority, with the others deferring to him in subtle ways. Sophia watched everything with sharp intelligence behind her polite smile. Marcus spoke rarely but with precision when he did. And Yuki seemed to find the entire evening amusing, like she was watching a play whose ending she already knew. It was midway through the main course when the conversation shifted. So, Victor, Antonio said, setting down his wine glass, you've been unusually quiet about the Brooklyn situation. We've all been wondering when you plan to make your move. Victor's expression didn't change, but Lena felt him tense beside her. The situation is being handled. The parties involved understand the consequences of continued interference. Do they? Marcus leaned forward slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they're testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before you push back. And I'm letting them, Victor replied calmly. Patience reveals intentions. Once I know exactly who's involved and what they're trying to accomplish, I'll respond appropriately. Appropriately, Yuki repeated, her accent making the word sound almost musical. Such a careful choice of language, Victor. You've always been so measured in your approach. It's what makes you valuable. But sometimes measured responses are interpreted as weakness. Let them interpret it however they like, Victor said. I'm not concerned with their perceptions. I'm concerned with outcomes. And the outcome will be exactly what I intend it to be. Lena tried to follow the conversation, but it felt like listening to people speak in code. Brooklyn's situation, and parties involved, boundaries being tested. Every word seemed to carry weight beyond its surface meaning. And what about new partnerships? Antonio asked, his gaze sliding to Lena briefly before returning to Victor. Are you open to expanding your network, or are you consolidating? That depends on the partnership being offered, Victor replied. I'm always open to mutually beneficial arrangements with people I trust, but trust, as we all know, is earned slowly and lost quickly. Indeed it is. Antonio smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Which is why bringing your personal life into business circles is always such an interesting choice. It creates vulnerabilities. The statement was a challenge, thinly veiled as observation. Lena felt Victor's hand tighten on hers under the table, but his expression remained neutral. It creates clarity, Victor corrected. Everyone here now knows that Lena is important to me, that any threat to her is a threat to me. That removes ambiguity, which I find infinitely preferable to wondering who might try to use personal connections as leverage. A bold strategy, Marcus said quietly. Exposing what you care about. Only if you're afraid of defending it, Victor replied. I'm not. The exchange sent a chill down Lena's spine. She was beginning to understand what Victor had meant about his world being dark and dangerous. These people weren't discussing business in the conventional sense. They were discussing power, territory, leverage, and Victor had just made her a piece on their chessboard by acknowledging how much she mattered to him. Sophia Ricci, who'd been silent through most of the dinner, chose that moment to speak directly to Lena. "How far along are you, dear?" she asked, her voice kind despite the calculating look in her eyes. Lena startled slightly at being addressed. 20 weeks, she said. About halfway. And the father? Sophia's question was delicate but pointed. Isn't in the picture, Lena replied, lifting her chin slightly. By choice. His choice. Ah. Sophia's expression flickered with what might have been sympathy. That must have been difficult. It was, Lena admitted, but it also clarified things, made me realize that the life I thought I wanted wasn't actually the one I needed. How philosophical, Antonio said dryly. And now you find yourself in Victor's orbit. One might argue you've traded one complicated situation for another. Lena felt anger spark in her chest at the dismissive tone. Before Victor could respond, she leaned forward slightly, meeting Antonio's gaze directly. With respect, Mr. Ricci, there's no comparison. My ex-husband abandoned me when I was pregnant and homeless because I was inconvenient to the life he wanted. Victor offered me stability, employment, and protection when I had nowhere else to turn. If that's complicated, I'll take complicated over abandoned any day. Silence fell over the table. Lena realized she might have overstepped, might have said too much or been too direct, but she was tired of being talked around, tired of being treated like an interesting problem rather than a person. Then Yuki laughed, genuine and delighted. "Oh, I like her," she said, looking at Victor with open amusement. "She has spine. That's rare in your world, Victor. Most people are too afraid of offending to speak truth." Victor's expression had softened, pride evident in his eyes as he looked at Lena. "Yes," he said quietly. "She does have spine. It's one of the many things I value about her." Antonio studied Lena for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "My apologies, Ms. Moore. I was testing you, which was rude. But now I understand why Victor chose to introduce you to us. You're not someone who needs protecting from our world. You're someone capable of existing in it." "I'm someone who survived worse than social politics," Lena said evenly. "And I'm someone who values honesty over games. If there's something you want to know about me or my relationship with Victor, ask directly. I'll either answer or tell you it's none of your business. But don't talk around me like I'm not here." The words were out before Lena could second-guess them. She felt Victor tense beside her, uncertain how the others would react to being called out so bluntly. But to her surprise, Sophia smiled warmly. "I think we're going to get along very well," Sophia said. "It's refreshing to meet someone who doesn't play games. Victor, you've chosen well." The atmosphere at the table shifted after that. The conversation became more genuine, less performative. Antonio asked Lena about her work with Victor, seemed genuinely interested in her assessment of his schedule management. Marcus discussed investments in maternal health initiatives his foundation supported, offering recommendations for pediatricians when the time came. Even Yuki warmed up, sharing stories about navigating male-dominated business environments that made Lena laugh despite herself. It was only when they were leaving, after handshakes and promises to meet again, that Antonio pulled Victor aside. Lena watched from a distance as the two men spoke in low, urgent tones. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw Victor's expression harden, saw Antonio gesture emphatically, saw the tension that crackled between them. Finally, Victor nodded once, sharp and final, and returned to Lena's side. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly as they headed for the car. "We'll talk about it when we get somewhere private," Victor said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The drive back to Victor's office building, not her apartment, she noted, was silent. Victor's hand held hers, but his jaw was clenched and his eyes were dark with fury. Lena didn't push, just held on, and waited. Once inside his office, Victor poured himself a drink, whiskey, straight, and downed it in one swallow. Then he turned to Lena, and the raw emotion on his face made her heart clench. What did Antonio say? She asked. That someone's been asking questions about you, about your connection to me, about your pregnancy, about Ethan. Victor's hands curled into fists. Someone's trying to find leverage, Lena, and they've identified you as my weakness. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they made her angry. Who? Antonio doesn't know yet, but he's going to find out. Victor crossed to her, his hands coming up to frame her face. I need you to understand something. What I do, the business I'm involved in, it's not entirely legal. I don't hurt innocent people, don't deal in anything truly dark, but I operate in gray areas. Import-export that doesn't always follow regulations. Consulting that's really negotiation between parties who can't go to authorities. I move money, I broker deals, and I protect people who can't protect themselves through conventional means. Lena had suspected as much, had known from the beginning that Victor's world existed outside normal boundaries. Hearing him confirm it didn't shock her the way it probably should have. Okay, she said simply. Victor blinked. Okay? Lena, I just told you I'm essentially a criminal, a well-connected, careful one, but still, you just told me you help people who can't get help through normal channels, Lena corrected. You told me you exist in gray areas, which is different from being evil. And you told me someone is trying to use me against you, which means we need to figure out who and why. She paused, meeting his eyes steadily. Unless I'm wrong? Unless you're actually involved in something that hurts people? No, Victor said firmly. I have lines I don't cross. Children are off limits. Human trafficking is off limits. Anything that creates victims is off limits. I facilitate transactions between willing parties, move money for people who need discretion, and occasionally apply pressure to people who deserve it, but I don't create suffering. Then I don't care about the legal technicalities, Lena said. I care that someone is targeting me to get to you. What do we do about it? Victor's expression cycled through surprise, relief, and something that looked like awe. You're not afraid? Of course I'm afraid, Lena admitted. But being afraid doesn't mean running. It means facing the problem with eyes open. You taught me that, Victor. You gave me the resources to fight back when Ethan tried to destroy me. Now someone else is threatening us? We fight back again. Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that Lena could feel his heart racing against her chest. You're extraordinary, he said roughly. You know that? I'm practical, Lena corrected. And I'm invested. This isn't just about you anymore, Victor. Someone's threatening my stability, my child's future. That makes it personal. Victor pulled back enough to look at her, his dark eyes intense. Which is exactly why we're going to end this quickly. Antonio is already putting out feelers, finding out who's asking questions. Once we know who, I'll handle it. How will you handle it? Lena asked carefully. Depends on who it is and what they want, Victor said. But it will be permanent. I don't leave loose ends, Lena, and I don't let threats to people I care about go unanswered. There was steel in his voice, a promise of violence that should have frightened her. Instead, it made Lena feel safe, protected. Like no matter what came next, Victor would stand between her and danger. I trust you, she said quietly, to do what needs to be done. Victor's expression softened. He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture of tenderness that contrasted sharply with the conversation they'd just had. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we start taking precautions. Security upgrade for your apartment, a driver for when you need to go anywhere, new protocols for the office. I'm not taking chances with your safety. Our safety, Lena corrected, placing his hand on her stomach where their baby, because that's what it had become in her mind, theirs rather than just hers, moved beneath her skin. We're a package deal now, Victor. Whatever protection you're offering, it covers both of us. Victor's hand splayed across her stomach, his expression transforming into something Lena had never seen before, wonder mixed with fierce protectiveness. Both of you, he agreed. I swear it, Lena. Nothing will touch either of you. I'll burn down anyone who tries. Lena believed him, believed it in the set of his jaw, the steel in his voice, the way his hand cradled her stomach like something precious. Whatever darkness existed in Victor Salerno's world, whatever violence he was capable of, it was all channeled toward protection, toward keeping safe the people who mattered to him. And she mattered to him. her and the child growing inside her. They both mattered enough that Victor was willing to go to war to keep them safe. The realization settled over Lena like a warm blanket. For the first time in months, maybe for the first time in years, she felt truly secure. Not because her circumstances were perfect, but because she had someone standing beside her who would fight for her without hesitation. "Take me home," she said softly. "Stay with me tonight. I don't want to be alone." Victor's eyes darkened with emotion. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Lena reached up, cupping his face the way he so often cupped hers. "I choose this, Victor. I choose you. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Victor kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Together," he agreed. "From now on, everything is together. You're not alone anymore, Lena. Neither of us is." As they left his office and headed toward the elevator, Lena felt the last pieces of her old life falling away. She wasn't Ethan Moore's abandoned wife anymore. Wasn't the helpless woman crying on a park bench with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. She was Lena Moore, survivor and fighter. She was carrying a child who would grow up knowing their mother had chosen strength over safety. And she was building something real with a man who saw her as an equal rather than a burden. The future was uncertain, dangerous even, with threats lurking in shadows she couldn't yet see. But Lena had stopped being afraid of uncertainty the moment she'd accepted Victor's business card in that frozen park. Had stopped being afraid of danger the moment she'd chosen to fight back against abandonment. Whatever came next, she would face it with her eyes open and her heart finally willing to trust again. Because the alternative, hiding from risk, protecting herself from potential pain, wasn't living. It was just existing. And Lena Moore was done merely existing. She was ready to fight for the life she deserved, ready to stand beside Victor Salerno and face whatever darkness his world contained, ready to become the mother her child needed, strong, brave, and absolutely unwilling to back down. The elevator doors closed on them standing close together, Victor's arm around her waist and Lena's head on his shoulder. Outside, Manhattan glittered with 1,000 stories of survival and struggle and second chances. Lena's story was just beginning, and this time she was writing it herself. The threat materialized 3 days later in the form of a manila envelope left on Lena's desk. She'd arrived at the office that morning to find it sitting there, unmarked except for her name written in block letters across the front. No postage, no return address. Someone had hand-delivered it, which meant someone had gotten past building security, past Victor's assistant, past every protection that should have kept strangers away from her. Lena's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of her leaving her apartment, entering the office building, sitting in cafes during her lunch breaks. Pictures of her at her prenatal appointments, the doctor's office clearly visible in the background. And worst of all, pictures of her with Victor, taken from a distance but clear enough to show them holding hands, kissing, existing together in moments that should have been private. Beneath the photographs was a single sheet of paper with a typed message that made Lena's blood run cold. Victor Salerno's protection only extends so far. Accidents happen to pregnant women all the time. It would be tragic if something happened to you or your baby because of his arrogance. Tell him to back off the Brooklyn deal, or you'll discover just how vulnerable you really are. Lena dropped the paper like it had burned her, nausea rising in her throat that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Someone was watching her, following her, documenting her life. And they were threatening her child, her innocent, unborn child, to manipulate Victor. She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers and called Victor's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Lena? What's wrong?" "Someone left an envelope on my desk," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Pictures of me, of us. And a threat about the baby if you don't back off from some Brooklyn deal." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. When Victor spoke again, his voice was deadly calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he'd been yelling. "Lock my office door from the inside and wait for me there. Don't touch anything else. I'm 2 minutes away." He hung up before Lena could respond. She grabbed the envelope and its contents, her skin crawling at the thought of someone watching her through a camera lens, and hurried into Victor's office. She locked the door as instructed and stood by the windows, hugging herself against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Victor arrived in less than 2 minutes, his expression carved from stone. He took one look at Lena's face, then at the envelope and photographs spread across his desk, and something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. "How did they get past security?" Lena asked, her voice small. "Because whoever delivered this wants me to know they can reach you anytime they want," Victor said flatly. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "They're making a statement, showing me that all my precautions mean nothing if they're determined enough." "What's the Brooklyn deal they want you to back off from?" Victor's jaw clenched. "A legitimate property development that happens to sit on land currently controlled by some people who've been using it for less legitimate purposes. They're trying to intimidate me into walking away so they can maintain their operations. What they don't understand is that threatening you just guaranteed I'll destroy them completely." The cold fury in his voice should have frightened Lena. Instead, it steadied her. Victor wasn't panicking or scrambling. He was calculating, planning, preparing to strike back. "What do we do?" she asked. "We end this," Victor said simply. "Today. Now." He looked up from his phone, his expression softening slightly as he took in her frightened face. "But first, I need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't touch you while I handle this." "I'm not hiding," Lena protested. "I'm not going to run and let them think they've won." "You're not running. You're being strategic." Victor crossed to her, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "Lena, they threatened our baby. That means they've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I need to respond to that, and I need to do it without worrying about your safety. Please, let me protect you while I handle this." The word "our" registered somewhere in Lena's consciousness, warming something in her chest despite the fear. Victor had claimed her child as his own, not just in private, but in the way he spoke about the threat. Not your baby, but our baby. "Where would I go?" she asked quietly. "Antonio has a safe house in Connecticut. Sophia will stay with you. She volunteered when I texted her about the situation. You'll be comfortable and completely secure. 24 hours, maybe less. That's all I need to resolve this permanently." Lena studied his face, seeing the determination there mixed with genuine concern for her well-being. "You're going after them?" "Yes." "Will you—" She hesitated, not sure she wanted to know the answer. "Will you hurt them?" Victor's expression was carefully neutral. "I'm going to make sure they can never threaten you or our child again. What that requires depends on how smart they are when I find them. But Lena, I need you to understand something. I will do whatever is necessary to keep you safe. Whatever. Can you accept that?" Lena thought about the photographs, about some stranger following her to her doctor's appointments and photographing her pregnant belly. Thought about the threat against her baby, an innocent life that hadn't asked to be caught in whatever power struggle was playing out. Thought about Ethan, who'd walked away from responsibility, versus Victor, who was preparing to walk into danger to protect them. "Yes," she said firmly. "I can accept that. Because they threatened our child, Victor. And anyone who does that deserves whatever you're planning to do to them." Victor kissed her forehead, lingering there for a moment like he was memorizing the feel of her. "Antonio is sending a car. It'll be here in 10 minutes. Pack whatever you need from your apartment. Sophia will have everything else ready for you." The next hour passed in a blur of organized chaos. Lena was escorted to her apartment by 2 men she'd never seen before, but who moved with the kind of controlled efficiency that suggested military or security backgrounds. She packed a bag while they waited, her hands steadier now that she had a plan to follow. By the time she returned to the lobby, a black SUV with tinted windows was waiting. Sophia Ricci stood beside the vehicle, her expression warm despite the circumstances. "Come, dear," she said, taking Lena's bag. "Let's get you somewhere comfortable while the men handle their business." The safe house turned out to be a sprawling estate an hour north of the city, set back from the road and surrounded by enough property that Lena couldn't see any neighboring houses. Sophia led her inside to a guest room that was larger than Lena's entire apartment, with windows overlooking gardens that were just beginning to show signs of early spring. "Try to rest," Sophia said gently. "I know that's probably impossible given the circumstances, but Victor will call as soon as he has news. Lena nodded, sinking onto the edge of the bed. How often does this happen? In your world, I mean. Threats like this? Sophia settled into an armchair near the window, her expression thoughtful. More often than it should, less often than you'd think. Most people in our circle understand the rules. You don't threaten families, you don't involve children, you keep business separate from personal. Whoever is behind this either doesn't know those rules or doesn't care. Either way, they've made a serious mistake. Because they threatened me? Because they threatened someone Victor has claimed is his, Sophia corrected. And because they involved an unborn child. That's not just crossing a line, that's obliterating it. Antonio and the others will help Victor handle this because allowing it to go unanswered would set a precedent none of us can afford. Lena processed this, understanding dawning. This isn't just about me and Victor. This is about the whole network, community, whatever you call it. Exactly, Sophia smiled approvingly. You're quick, Lena. That's good. You'll need to be being part of Victor's life. The thing you need to understand is that people like us, we operate outside conventional systems, but we have our own rules, our own codes. And one of the most sacred rules is that families are off limits. Children are off limits. The moment someone violates that, they become everyone's problem. It should have been terrifying, this glimpse into a world where violence was sanctioned by unwritten codes and ancient rules. But Lena found it oddly comforting. Victor wasn't acting alone. He had allies, people who would help him protect her not just because they liked him, but because allowing the threat to stand would undermine their entire system. What will happen to them? Lena asked quietly. The people who sent the photographs? Sophia's expression hardened. That depends on Victor. But if I had to guess, they'll disappear from New York. Their business interests will crumble. And they'll spend the rest of their lives knowing that if they ever come near you or your child again, the consequences will be significantly worse than exile. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a text from Victor. Found them. Handling it now. You're safe. I promise. She showed the message to Sophia, who nodded with satisfaction. Good. Antonio texted me too, said it was exactly who they suspected, some idiots trying to muscle into territory they don't control. This will be resolved quickly. The hours that followed were among the longest of Lena's life. She tried to rest, tried to read, tried to do anything that would quiet the anxious voice in her head, wondering what handling it actually meant. Sophia kept her company, telling stories about her own journey into this world, about meeting Antonio and learning to navigate the complexities of their unconventional life. I was a lawyer, Sophia said at one point, surprising Lena. Corporate law, very prestigious firm. I met Antonio when he needed legal representation for a property dispute. I thought he was just a businessman with complicated holdings. It took me 3 months to realize he was so much more than that. Were you afraid? Lena asked. When you found out the truth? Terrified, Sophia admitted, but also fascinated. Antonio never lied to me, never pretended to be something he wasn't once I started asking questions. And I realized that the world he lived in, while dangerous, operated on a kind of honor that my legitimate legal world often lacked. At least with Antonio and his associates, you knew where you stood. There was honesty in that, even if nothing else was conventional. Lena understood exactly what Sophia meant. Victor had been honest with her from the beginning, in his way. He'd never pretended to be a conventional businessman. He'd warned her his world was dark and dangerous. And he'd given her every opportunity to walk away before she got too deep. But she hadn't walked away. And now, sitting in a safe house while Victor dealt with people who'd threatened their child, Lena realized she had no regrets about that choice. Fear, yes. Anxiety about what the future held, absolutely. But no regrets. The sun was setting when Lena's phone finally rang with Victor's number. She answered it with shaking hands. Lena. His voice was rough, tired, but alive. It's done. They won't bother you again. Relief flooded through her so intensely it made her dizzy. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Not a scratch on me. She heard what might have been a car door closing in the background. I'm heading to you now. We'll stay at the safe house tonight. Give everything time to settle. Tomorrow, we go home. Victor, what did you... Tomorrow, he interrupted gently. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. For tonight, just know that you're safe. You and our baby are safe, and no one will threaten you again. That's all that matters. Lena closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. Okay. Tomorrow. I'll be waiting. I love you, Victor said suddenly, the words raw and unguarded. I should have said it before, should have told you weeks ago. But I love you, Lena. You and the life we're building together. That's what I was protecting today. That's what I'll always protect. Tears streamed down Lena's face, but they were good tears this time. Happy tears. I love you too, she whispered. Come home to me, Victor. Come home to us. True to his word, Victor arrived at the safe house 2 hours later. Lena met him at the door, and the moment she saw him, whole, unharmed, looking at her like she was everything that mattered, she threw herself into his arms. Victor held her tight, his face buried in her hair, his body trembling slightly with exhaustion and relief and emotion. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you, and I'm never letting go. That night, curled up together in the safe house guest room, Victor told Lena everything. About the Brooklyn property development, about the rival organization that had been using the land for money laundering operations, about how they thought threatening her would make him back down. He told her about confronting them with Antonio and Marcus as backup, about the choice he'd given them, leave New York permanently or face consequences that would destroy them completely. They chose to leave, Victor said, his arms wrapped around Lena from behind, his hand resting on her stomach. They're gone, Lena. Out of the city, out of our lives. The Brooklyn development will proceed. Their operations are being dismantled by federal authorities as we speak, anonymously tipped off, of course, and they know that if they ever come back, if they ever even think about you again, I'll make sure they regret it. You didn't hurt them? Lena asked, needing to know. I didn't need to. The threat of what I could do was enough. Victor's voice was quiet but firm. I'm not a monster, Lena. I don't hurt people for pleasure, but I'm absolutely willing to do whatever is necessary to protect what's mine. Today, the necessary thing was making them understand that you're untouchable. Mission accomplished. Lena turned in his arms to face him. Our baby moved again today, she said softly, while I was worried about you, like they were reminding me to have faith. Victor's expression transformed, wonder replacing the lingering tension. His hand moved across her stomach, searching for movement. Can I feel it? As if on cue, the baby kicked, a strong flutter against Victor's palm. Lena watched his face cycle through surprise, joy, and something that looked almost like reverence. That's our child, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Our baby, Lena, not Ethan's, mine, ours. Yours, Lena agreed, covering his hand with hers. In every way that matters, this baby is ours. You're going to be their father, Victor. The only father they'll ever know. Victor kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Marry me, he said suddenly. Not because you're pregnant or because you need protection, but because I want to build a life with you, because I want this baby to have our name, because I want to stand up in front of everyone who matters and claim you as mine. Marry me, Lena. Lena's heart felt so full it might burst. Yes, she said, laughing through happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry you and build a life with you and raise our child together. Yes to all of it, Victor. Yes. The months that followed passed in a blur of preparation and transformation. The Brooklyn development proceeded without incident, becoming one of Victor's most successful legitimate ventures. The rival organization that had threatened Lena dissolved completely, their members scattered and their operations destroyed. And Lena's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing and growing to accommodate the life inside her. They married quietly in April, with just Sophia and Antonio as witnesses, in a small ceremony at the safe house that had become symbolic of new beginnings. Lena wore a simple dress that accommodated her 7-month pregnant belly, and Victor wore a suit and an expression of such pure happiness that it made her cry. I, Victor Salerno, take you, Lena Moore, to be my wife, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I promise to protect you and our child with everything I have, to be honest even when the truth is hard, to stand beside you in joy and in struggle, and to never, ever walk away, no matter what challenges we face. This I swear. Lena's vows were simpler but no less meaningful. I, Lena Moore, take you, Victor Salerno, to be my husband. I promise to be strong when you need strength, to trust you when you ask for trust, and to build a life with you based on choice rather than necessity. You saved me when I had nothing, and now I choose you with everything I am. This I swear. When they kissed as husband and wife, Lena felt the last pieces of her old life fall away completely. She wasn't Ethan Moore's abandoned wife anymore. She was Lena Salerno, partner to a man who'd proven his devotion through actions rather than words. She was safe, loved, and building the future she'd always deserved but had been too afraid to reach for. The baby came in late May, arriving 3 weeks early in a blur of controlled chaos and Victor's barely concealed panic. Lena labored for 14 hours with Victor never leaving her side, his hand in hers, his voice steady even when she could see fear in his eyes. "You're doing beautifully," he kept saying. "You're so strong, Lena, so incredibly strong." And when their daughter finally arrived, tiny and perfect and screaming with healthy lungs, Victor cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands and cried openly for the first time since Lena had known him. "She's perfect," he whispered, staring at the baby in Lena's arms with absolute wonder. "She's absolutely perfect." They named her Elena Sofia Salerno, after Lena and the woman who'd helped protect them when they needed it most. And when the nurse asked for the birth certificate information, Victor provided it without hesitation. Father: Victor Salerno. Mother: Lena Salerno. No mention of Ethan Moore. No trace of the man who'd chosen to walk away. Just the truth that mattered. This child belonged to the people who'd chosen to love her. 2 weeks after Elena's birth, a legal envelope arrived at their apartment. Inside were documents finalizing the termination of Ethan's parental rights and a separate set of papers showing Victor's legal adoption of Elena. She was officially, completely, irrevocably theirs. Lena held the papers while nursing Elena, tears streaming down her face. Victor sat beside them on the couch, his arm around her shoulders, watching his daughter with the kind of fierce protectiveness Lena had come to recognize as his default expression. "Thank you," Lena said softly, "for everything. For seeing me that night in the park, for giving me a chance when I had nothing, for loving me and our daughter, for being exactly the man we needed." Victor kissed the top of her head, gentle and reverent. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept help, for being strong enough to survive, for trusting me with your heart when you had every reason not to trust anyone." He paused, looking down at Elena sleeping peacefully in Lena's arms. "And thank you for giving me a family, for letting me be a father to this perfect little girl. You've given me everything that matters, Lena." In the quiet of their apartment, with their daughter sleeping between them and the city stretching out beyond their windows, Lena felt peace settle over her like a blanket. The journey from that frozen park bench to this moment had been terrifying and painful and fraught with danger, but it had also been transformative. She'd learned that strength came in many forms, in accepting help when you needed it, in fighting back when you were threatened, in choosing love even when it was complicated and scary. She'd learned that family wasn't defined by biology, but by choice, by who showed up when it mattered, by who loved unconditionally even when circumstances were messy. And she'd learned that sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures, that abandonment could lead to a love deeper than anything she'd imagined, that hitting rock bottom could be the beginning of rising higher than she'd ever thought possible. Ethan Moore had walked away from his responsibility, had chosen comfort over commitment, and in doing so, he'd given Victor Salerno the opportunity to step in and become the father Elena deserved, had given Lena the chance to find a partner who saw her as an equal rather than a burden, had inadvertently created the space for a family forged not by blood, but by choice, protection, and unwavering devotion. As Elena stirred in her arms, making the small sounds babies make before waking, Lena looked at Victor and smiled. "Ready for your turn?" Victor took their daughter with practiced ease, cradling her against his chest like she was made of precious glass. Elena settled immediately, recognizing her father's heartbeat, his warmth, his presence. And watching them together, This man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, and the daughter he loved as fiercely as if he'd been there from conception, Lena felt her heart overflow with gratitude. "I love you," she said, "not for the first time and certainly not for the last. Both of you, my family." Victor looked up from Elena's face, his dark eyes warm with emotion. "We love you too, more than words can express, Lena. You're our heart, our everything." Outside, Manhattan continued its endless rhythm of survival and struggle, of dreams pursued and second chances seized. And inside their apartment, the Salerno family began writing the next chapter of their story. One built on the foundation of love chosen rather than love assumed, of loyalty proven rather than loyalty promised, of protection offered and gratitude returned. Lena Moore had walked into a winter night believing her life was over. But she'd walked out of that darkness hand in hand with Victor Salerno, and together they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Not a fairy tale ending, because fairy tales were simple and their life was beautifully complex, but a real ending, honest and hard-won and absolutely worth every struggle it had taken to get there. An ending that was really just a beginning for a family bound not by circumstance, but by choice. A family who understood that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, standing strong, and refusing to walk away when things got difficult. And as Elena slept peacefully in her father's arms, and Lena watched them with eyes full of love, she knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next exactly as they'd faced everything so far. Together, with courage and conviction and unbreakable trust. Together, they were home.